Okay, today we're going to be tying a parachute Adams. I'm going to tie it, I don't know, I guess you can say female style as they call it, with a green egg sac on the back. As I mentioned in my video for the dry fly version of this fly, I've always found that kind of funny. But I wanted to do a video on how I tie my parachutes, so I figured this would be a good fly to do it with. There's a few things that you got to kind of pay attention to a little bit. I'm going to use calf tail for the post, which can be, you know, when you take a clump of that stuff, there's a lot of underfur built up in there that can really build up a lot of bulk on your body. So I like to kind of pick all that stuff out of there, kind of just like deer hair. See how much you get out of there? Just get all that out. And if you want to stack it and make it so that you have that nice, you know, the tips all in a line and all that stuff, you can do that, but I don't really do that for my parachutes. What I usually do is I just tie the whole thing in and I snip it. You can still see it just as well. And I know it doesn't have the sharp little tips at the top all in alignment, but you know, the fish don't care, so who cares? So we'll get this with a few real tight wraps here to kind of cinch it in. It'll probably twist around on you, but that's okay. You can just slide it right back over. Now we want to work on the taper of the body. So I'm going to kind of grip all this and slip my scissors in there. And I want that to taper down to about the halfway point of the shank. So I'm going to cut that off at an angle. And if you get that down to about the halfway point or so, once you start locking all that in with your thread, it'll start to taper down nicely. And the thread I'm using here is the thread that I use for dry flies in all my videos pretty much, which is the 18-aught nano silk. Very little buildup, very strong, easily my favorite thread. Okay, so there's that. Now for the tail, I don't normally do the traditional 2 feathers for the tail. I'll just use one of these cree feathers. This will cover all my bases, get all the colors and everything in there. So get that tied right in after I measured it out. I want that to be about a body length or so. I mean, again, it's all, you know, all up to you, whatever you like. So there's my tail. For the egg sac, what I'm going to use is a piece of this fluorescent, not fluorescent, this chartreuse floss is what I was trying to say. And I'll slide that in the back and get that over the other side of the shank so I can get that locked in pretty well. And I'm going to hold my thread tight, and I want to pull that as close as I possibly can. Now, if I leave any of the tag end going up the body, what's going to happen is I'm going to build up some bulk, and I don't really want to do that. So I'm going to take my floss and I'm going to twist it. And the reason why I twist it is because all those strands are going to start to spread out if I just start wrapping it. And I really just want kind of like a little hot spot towards the tail. Ah, I've popped right out of there. That's all right. That's easy to get right back in. But like I was saying, I don't want to build up any bulk. And the reason why I twist it is because, sorry, caught me mid-yawn. I twist that up simply because if I start wrapping it, all the fibers are going to kind of separate, and it's going to put me in a position where, you know, it's going to start to spread out. And I really just want it kind of like a hot spot. And what I did is I saw that I'm short a little bit of bulk on the body. I think I cut the calf tail a little too short. So I'm actually going to use a little bit of this floss to fill in some of that. All of my underbodies are tapered to, you know, the exact shape that I want them. I don't use the dubbing to create my bodies. I use my underbody. So I'll get that wrapped around 2 max. You know, the floss is kind of thick, so you don't really want many more than 2. We'll get that cinched down. And I'm going to let that rotate a little bit onto the top of the shank so that it gives me the bulk that I want. I get that nice tapered body that I'm looking for. And notice I cut that before I got to the top of my taper. Okay, now get that stood up. Get a little thread dam in front here. It's the one downside of nano silk. I love the fact that it's thin and it doesn't build up a whole lot of bulk. But if you're trying to stand up a parachute or something, Got to use a little bit more thread than normal because I don't like using a lot of thread to build up a dam. I'll explain why in one of my dry fly videos, but the parachute is pretty easy. Yeah, I've seen a lot of videos where people use UV resin and a number of different things to get that parachute to stand up. I never really understood it. If you don't use a ton of tension, you really could just run your thread right up the parachute and get it to stand up just like I'm doing here. There are other ways to do it with UV resin, and sometimes I've seen people slip a piece of mono up in there. I've seen people do a number of different things, but I've never really understood why. You just run your thread right up it and secure it and you're good. So for the dubbing, I'm using the Adams Gray microfine dry fly dubbing. And as always, very, very thin noodle. Just a little wisp on the thread. Gives you a lot more control over your body so that you can shape it the way you want. And I'm going to have to get quite a bit on here because it's going to require quite a bit of dubbing to work my way up. Actually, one thing I forgot was to cure the hot spot with UV resin, but I'll do that in a second here before I wrap the body. It's one of the things I'm notorious for, is forgetting materials, especially on my streamers. Always forget legs and all kinds of little steps. But at least I caught this one before I had to go back. So generally what I do is, because I want this to kind of be uniform around, put a little dash on my bodkin because I really don't want that spin, floating up my body. So if I just put it on the bodkin, I can put the resin exactly where I want it, get it to sink in exactly where I want it. And I got a little bit of a bubble on top, so I'm just going to take it and just push it around. And this is the thick version of the resin too, so it's really easy to kind of move it around, put it where you want. The thin resin would really just kind of sink right into the egg sac there, and it'd be a little bit bulkier than I want. So let me zap that quick. Good. All right, now we can actually wrap the body. Get my vise locked up here. Get that back to my starting point. I want to start the dubbing around the same size as that egg sac. There we go. Get that right up the body. And again, if you do a really good underbody, that dubbing and everything is just going to follow the taper that you made. Makes it a lot easier. I know a lot of people like to, do the taper with the dubbing and put more dubbing on the bottom end and all that. And I like to use less dubbing. I've always believed the more dubbing you use, the more material there is to soak up water. So here's how I do my feathers. I do them backwards from the way I do my dry flies. With the shiny side facing me, I'm going to pull more barbs off of the bottom as opposed to the top. Now when I tie a dry fly, I take more off the top so that it wraps evenly, but I tie my parachutes with the shiny side facing down. So what I do here is I rip more fibers off of the bottom part of the feather. And this one is really kind of giving me hell here. I can't get that to tie in right. It's kind of funny. I spent a good amount of money on a silver. I've got some platinum hackle. I've got some gold. But this grizzly feather I'm using is from a silver cape. And it's beautiful, very long fibers, but for some reason the feathers on this cape never sit the way that I want them to, and it drives me nuts. So I'm going to do the same thing with my brown, rip more barbs off the bottom than you are the top. And the reason why is because when you wrap it around to start your wraps, you want it to sit on the post the way that it's intended to. Good. And then once we get the bottoms, we'll hold them tight and we'll wrap right up the post, getting those to stay right where you want them to be, and we're good to go. So I'm going to snip off the tip of these. I want to leave a little bit because I do like using the stems to, build a little bit of bulk to continue with the taper. Taper for the main part of the body looks really good, so We'll run our thread all the way to the hook eye. And listen, this is how I tie my parachutes. I mean, you're probably going to watch other videos and see a number of different ways to tie a parachute, but this is my method. So I'm going to dub this up and work my way back towards the parachute. I don't tie off my parachute patterns at the eye. I tie my parachute patterns off on the actual parachute post. So get that, we'll get that wrapped up. I like it that way too because you can go all the way to the eye. So get one wrap right at the eye. And we'll work our way back, building up a little bit of bulk to make sure that that's all uniform. Nice and tight. And then I'm going to leave my thread in front, and I'm going to take the hook right out of the vise. And I'm going to angle it straight up and down and cinch that in. And I do this because now the hackling process really kind of works out just the same way you would a regular dry fly. We're just going to wrap it right around the post as if we were wrapping it around the shank. It's quite easy. So we'll start with the brown. Remember, when you do a double hackle fly, you always wrap the last hackle that you tied in, because then it's just going to sit nicely, and then the other hackle will sit on top of it. It wraps a lot easier. So now we'll get going, get this right down the post. I'm going to leave some gaps so that I can get my grizzly right in there without a problem. That looks good. And I just got to tighten that a little bit so it doesn't come undone. Get a little half hitch in there. That way I won't lose my work. A lot of times what will happen is when you get to the end, sometimes that wants to unravel a little bit, but now this isn't going anywhere. I caught my feather a little bit in the half hitch. Just pull that out of there. It's always something. A lot of times I make mistakes and I just leave them on my videos so you can kind of see what to do here. I'm just going to kind of wiggle that out of there. Tighten it down. I'm going to cut it all off anyway, so it doesn't even matter if I trap the barb or two. So a lot of times I break thread, I do all kinds of different things, and I make sure I just include it in the video. See, now this feather, I told you, these feathers drive me nuts. They don't turn over. I guess it's a good thing that they have a real supple quill on them, but it does make it pretty difficult. But because it's a 2-hackle fly, it won't really matter all that much. The other hackle will make it lay straight, so it won't affect anything. So I'm just going to tie that right in. Secure that. And this is where I get my actual whip finish right in there. So the fly's pretty much done. The only thing we're going to do here is we are going to do some scissor work here to clean some things up. Let's get the thread out of there first. Then you want to get right in there, get your hackles out of there, make sure you cut those as close to the post as you possibly can. I'm going to get the post tied or cut off. Get that snipped right off even. See, that's the way I do mine. And as I said, you know, the fish don't care. There's going to be a lot of little stray fibers laying around, but we'll get those out of there. We'll get some of the extra ones cut off. A couple on the back side giving me problems. And that's pretty much it. It's a pretty straightforward fly. Obviously a complete classic, Parachute Adams, but you know, there's a number of different ways to tie parachutes. That's the way that I do mine. You can tie pretty much any parachute with that method, and hit subscribe.